I don't think players are getting tired of roguelites. I think players are tired of the same roguelite. Because for a while now, a lot of games have been following the same very familiar rhythm. Clear a room, pick one of 3 upgrades, move on, repeat. I think that loop used to feel fresh almost by itself, but now it doesn't. So I want to talk about why so many developers keep choosing roguelites, why that choice made so much sense for years, and why I think players are starting to demand something a little bit more intentional now. This is not a genre takedown, it's more of a take on why this structure became so dominant and why it feels a little less magical than before. I think one reason why roguelites became so attractive is simple. They're extremely efficient. If you make a more linear, especially an action game, you usually need a lot of handcrafted content. You need distinct levels, deliberate pacing, new set pieces, progression that feels authored, and enough unique moments that the player feels like they're moving forward into something new. A roguelite can get much more mileage out of less. The same rooms can come back, the same enemies can come back, the same systems can come back. Because if the build changes, or the order changes, or the modifiers changes, the run will feel like it has variety. So from a production point of view, roguelites are not easy exactly. A good one still is hard to make, but they are often efficient. They let small teams get more playtime out of fewer handcrafted assets and encounters. And on top of that, players already understand the loop. Death is expected, resetting is expected, meta progression is expected, randomness is expected. So the genre is very easy to pitch, easier to structure, and more forgiving when it comes to content that is being reused. I think that one of the clearest comparisons that we can make is comparing Bastion with Hades, because they're the same studio, they're very strong taste on how the games have been made, very strong combat, and a very strong presentation. But you see, they solve content in a different way. Bastion is much more authored. Its identity depends a lot more on a progression through a design journey. New places, new pacing, new sequencing. One moment leading into the next. If Bastion made you replay the same path over and over as a main structure, I think it would feel repetitive a lot faster. Much because the appeal of the game is on a forward motion, but Hades is different. Hades is built on repetition. Hades is not only built around repetition, but repetition is part of the contract. The rooms repeat, the enemies repeat, the structure repeats, but the booms changes, the weapon changes, the run changes, and the game is constantly trying to make repetition feel meaningful. So Hades gets much more playtime out of recombination. And I think that's why roguelites became so popular among indie developers on the first place. Not because they're lazy, but because it's structurally efficient. But I think the problem now is that players have seen the structure too many times. And once the structure becomes familiar, you stop feeling the magic of the structure itself. At first, the concept of every run is different is exciting. But now, if all that really means is slightly different perks, slightly different room order, slightly different stat stacking, then the player starts to see the skeleton underneath. And that's when the loop stops feeling like a possibility and starts feeling like a routine. I think a lot more recent discontent comes from that. Not from randomness itself, not from replayability itself, but from how many games now lean on the same default loop. You fight, you choose a perk and repeat. At some point, players stopped asking, what build will I get this time? And started asking, am I doing the same thing again with different numbers on it? And once that question appears, the genre loses its spell. I don't think the model stopped working. I think just the default version stopped working. The roguelites that still feel strong usually do at least one of these things really well. They have a very strong identity. Hades doesn't just have runs, it has characters, it has a tone for the game, it has good dialogues that progress, it has reactivity, the world reacts to what you do in a very clear way, it has world building. They make the decisions feel genuinely different. Slay the Spire doesn't just give you random perks, it forces you into meaningful deck building trade-offs. They're mechanically clean enough that repetition still feels good. Dead Cells is still enjoyable partly because the movement and combat themselves are satisfying. They add a twist that changes the whole texture of the loop. Vampire Survivors felt huge because it shifted the genre's scale and density. It didn't just do the same chamber loop with a new skin, so I think the audience still likes roguelites when it's supporting something stronger. What players seems to be tired of is when randomness becomes a substitute for authorship. When it feels like the game is saying, don't worry, the replayability will carry it. Because now, I don't think replayability carries the game by itself anymore. And I think this is where more handcrafted games may start feeling more appealing again. Because a handcrafted game can offer something roguelites often struggle with: specificity. A room that only happens once. A moment that was entirely placed there on purpose. A sequence that feels remembered, not just recombined. That doesn't make linear games automatically better. A bad linear game can feel very thin very quickly. But I do think some players are starting to miss the feeling of this moment was made for this exact place in the experience. Not, this is another variation of the run. So maybe what's changing in the market is not that players are hating replayable games. Maybe they just want stronger intention behind it. Less default loop, more authorship. Less randomness as a filler, more structure that feels chosen. I don't think this is as simple roguelites bad, linear good thing, because handcrafted games are harder to make feel like a complete experience. They expose their weakness much faster. If pacing is weak, you feel it. If content is thin, you feel it. Roguelites became popular for reasons. I think players just had enough exposure to this structure, so now they're asking for more than just the structure itself, which means that the structure still works, it just doesn't impress by itself anymore. So I think the question now is not, should developers stop making roguelites? I think the question is just, does this game specifically have to be one? Because if the answer is just, it helps with replayability, or players understand the loop, that may not be enough anymore. And honestly, I think that's a good thing, because it probably pushes games to be more specific again. Now, what's your take on the subject? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you agree to disagree? Are you tired of roguelites themselves, or are you tired of the same loop being used in the same way every time? Tell me in the comments, and see you on the next video.